So, Bhikhu, there are many approaches to multiculturalism that have appeared in the literature and indeed in practice over the years. I was wondering if you could tell us what's distinctive about your approach to multiculturalism.
Well, I think when the question presupposes there is something distinctive, and I'm sure there is, partly because of my background as an Indian who lived in a plural society in India, profoundly influenced by India's cultural diversity. The most diverse country I can think of in terms of religion, in terms of culture, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of all kinds of things. Coming to Britain, very different. So given, and then traveling abroad, spending some time in Canada and the United States as a visiting professor, and from all those experiences trying to reflect on multiculturalism. So naturally I bring to the subject a distinct sensitivity. Now I would say that for me multiculturalism is articulated in terms of two basic theses. First of all, like Kimlicka, I entirely agree that culture is a context of choice. It gives you resources in terms of which you articulate your aspirations, your goals, and so on. But I also emphasize the imperfections, the limitations of each culture. No culture is perfect. Every culture has its limitations. And let's start with that central fact of life.
Yes.
Thesis number one. Thesis number two. How do we recognize those imperfections? How do we get over them? Now there the traditional answer is to postulate transcendental reason. The reason which can transcend all the limitations of an individual, all the limitations of his culture, and can think and, from on high, looking at his culture and pointing out limitations. That is just not possible. Because reason, which is supposed to do all this, is not culture free. It is itself profoundly shaped by, tied to culture. Therefore, transcendental reason is not the way to remove the imperfections of a culture. The answer for me is to look at one's own culture from the standpoint of others. And they are able to point out limitations of mine, and I think, yes, I think you're right. And that sets me thinking. So my second thesis is that the redemption of each culture's limitations are to be found within the realm of culture itself, not postulating a transcendental reason. So these two theses, that culture is crucial to human life, at the same time it has its imperfections and limitations, which can only be overcome through intercultural dialogue. That, for me, is what multiculturalism is about. And that means that the notion of interactive multiculturalism, dialogical multiculturalism as I call it, is built into the very concept of multiculturalism. So when people say today, like that our beloved Prime Minister David Cameron and others, that multiculturalism is dead because it means that each culture is living in its own silo, I would say that is not multiculturalism. That is plural monoculturalism.
Right.
And then you treat each culture as a self-contained universe, perfect in its own terms. I reject that. For me, because each culture has its limitations, that it needs the other. Now, important thing here is to emphasize the importance of the other. Now, that is new in my approach, that I need the other to hold a kind of mirror in which I see myself, recognize my strengths and limitations, and at the same time find something interesting to borrow from. So the importance of the other as my interlocutor is absolutely crucial to my approach to multiculturalism.
It's a very interesting approach, isn't it? It is distinctive. It does have its history in the sense that its influences. You can see it in an idealist tradition as well. This notion about communities growing through the interaction of the people within them. And you mentioned Hegel at one point in a recent book, but ditch all of the very obscure German metaphysics. And it seems to me that that's perfectly right. That is a very clear development, and it picks up on some other forms of writings that we find, so Charles Taylor with the politics of recognition, but a far more sensitivity, as I read it at least in your account, to the need for an ongoing reconsideration of one's identity. And identity is, of course, the criticism of Taylor is the best fixed, and that each of these cultures has its own inner logic and definite boundaries. And that isn't the case, it seems to me, with your approach. As you said, the important thing is recognising the imperfections, the raggedness and blurriness of some cultures, not least the dominant culture, of course. And so that sense of dialogue then is a very distinctive aspect of your approaches, and that's what many of us find so intriguing about your approach.
Well, I hope you're right. Thank you.